Hello, and welcome to week 11 in the psychology of adulthood. And we're taking on chapter 10, adult sexuality. Now, this is one of the topics that rarely gets discussed, actually, about is sexuality in later life. And the transition that we just went through in the course when we look at midlife and the effects of physiological changes, the midlife events, midlife crises, all of those circumstances that could lead us to examining our current status and whatnot can have an impact, of course, on sexuality. Now, throughout the lifespan, there are benefits for a continued sexual life, not only physiologically, but emotionally, in terms of connection with others, well-being. I think it's on page 179. There's a feeling of well-being, emotional and physical sensation, creativity, the way we nurture ourselves, stress relief, all of these things which are benefits to an active sexual life in late adulthood might come under question at this point. So kind of why I put this topic at this point in the class rather than talking about it when we're specifically within late life coming right up, is that this transition of changes physiologically that might change and modify our sexual lives may be a trigger for midlife or midlife crisis, midlife event, those kinds of things. So I started off with the attention getter, which was a lecture or I don't know, maybe among all the experiences that I've had and whatnot, I came across this idea that sexuality in the elder population is kind of like riding a bike. And the major barriers to a person having continued sexuality in their life is they don't own a bike, meaning they don't have a partner. They can't get up on the bike. There's physiological reasons why they can't engage in sexuality the way they used to or whatnot. And their body image is such that they feel they look stupid riding on a bike. So if we replace sexuality with each one of those instances of bike, we get a sense of where the barriers are specifically to persons having sexuality in late life. So what we're really kind of looking at when we look at the role that sexuality plays, if you remember when we were talking about Robert Sternberg's triarchic theory of love, we had commitment, intimacy, and passion. So commitment, the agreed upon relationship with others that encompasses friendships as well as romantic relationships, companions, and whatnot. And then you have intimacy, which is the sharing of information, the sharing of yourself, all those things. The component that can become less addressed or becomes problematic in a relationship might be the passion one. And is unwise to simply neglect that aspect of that love triangle. We need all three of those components, and thinking about and developing notions about how to address sexuality in later life, how to maintain that passion in whatever form that can take, is important for our careers, particularly in social sciences and social services and whatnot, but also important in our own personal lives as we are aging in order to maintain that passion later on in life. So there's only a quiz. Just to review this material. There's some links to the APA website. There's some links to the aging website about what's going on in terms of sexuality as we transition into late adulthood and the kind of barriers that can exist for people to have healthy sexual lives. And consider that in terms of the future of your career. Throughout the years that I was a social worker and working mental health and whatnot, it was very rare that a person's sexual life came up in treatment planning. It really was not something that was discussed. It was people were embarrassed to discuss it, or they were uncomfortable, or they didn't think it was relevant, or there's so many other important things. And I'm here to tell you that it's extremely important throughout our lives to address those issues. And you may be the individual who sits down with a client, or sits down with a friend, or with even within your own lives, and addressing those concerns openly, and looking at resources that are available and whatnot in order to maintain those fully engaged relationships that we have in that important aspect of our identity and our lives. The sale of erectile dysfunction medicine tells us, the high sales of that tells us of the concern, in this case of men, or who may or may not be experiencing challenges with maintaining an erection or getting an erection, how important that is to their sense of self, their sense of manhood, their sense of performance, to the point that it is well known that the prescriptions for ED medication far outnumber the actual diagnoses for erectile dysfunction. So this concern among men about continued virility and performance, kind of going along with the focus on youthful looks for women. So we have, viral performance on men and looks on women. In late life, we're entering into this area where these very, very relevant topics about our identities, which have been supported within our culture as important to our identities, become challenged because of aging. And we're not a culture that necessarily takes on aging gracefully. We try to fight it all the way, tooth and nail, hiding wrinkles and making sure that I can still perform and all of these things, and get paranoid and anxious about that. And the media has certainly put forward the notion of manliness and beautifulness late in life, and how important that is. And really, to a degree, how that pursuit for that kind of looks or performance later in life can ultimately be destructive and can be obsessive. And so thinking about that, thinking about the realities of aging, and thinking about how they impact sexuality, the quiz is just for you to reflect on, how do you think that this is important? Reflect on what you've read, reflect on what I've said, what you think, all of these things in the quiz. That's pretty much what I'm expecting to do this week. So have a great week looking at this material, deeply thinking about it. The discussions have been great. This midlife discussion that we just went through was just absolutely amazing. I'm really thankful, grateful that people are sharing their stories and great challenges that people have, and yet here you are pursuing your education, your degrees, and whatnot. So very, very humble feeling on my end to be facilitating in some way these conversations. So off we go. So there's a quiz. There's no discussion this coming week. There's just the quiz for this chapter, so you can enjoy that little break from that intense sort of sharing that we just went through, and we'll return to discussions on the next week. So have a great week. Take care, and I will see you online.